Well, folks, here we are. Happy launch weekend. This is it. Years of waiting and speculating and tech tests and leaks and then the server slam. After all of that, we're finally here. But look, I wanted to check in rather on what we've been hearing a lot of discourse about, which is player numbers and the future of Marathon. So I want to state outright, this isn't going to be like a doomer video. I'm going to present a positive scenario and a negative scenario. My headline thoughts are the opening of Marathon is promising. Not great, not terrible, but promising. And it all depends how Bungie executes. So the reason why we're talking about numbers, there's a lot of like toxic discourse around this, and some people are really finicky about the numbers and look into them too much. Others dismiss them out of hand and say, look, come on, it's all about how we enjoy the game. Numbers don't matter. The truth is somewhere in the middle. Numbers do matter because if we want... Look, we've got a lot of content here with Marathon on launch. We've got a great endgame raid coming up with the Marathon ship, and I think that's going to be the big differentiator for the game. Ranked mode and the endgame raid. If we want more content like this, if we want a map every 2 seasons, a new runner every 2 seasons, maybe a new raid every year, to get that sort of content, Sony needs to pay the bills, Bungie needs to develop, and for all that finance to make sense, the numbers need to work out. That's the real reality. So let's dig in here. Like I said, it's a promising start. I just want to be realistic with you folks about what we can expect and present a good ending and a bad ending, if you like, for the future of Marathon. So let's look at the numbers. The game, so the server slam, which was free at the point of entry, that opened with 150,000 players on Steam last weekend. Now, when I say Steam, I obviously mean PC. We don't have insight into Xbox and PlayStation numbers. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, let's say the total player count is about... This doesn't exactly work out because obviously PlayStation's a much bigger platform than Xbox, but let's just say we'll triple the Steam player count. Now, that's not realistic. The chances are the number comes in a bit below that, but let's just say when I'm talking about these Steam numbers, you can roughly triple it. That's your rough total concurrent player count across platforms. So looking at Steam numbers, which is the only numbers we have, it opened 150,000 free for the server slam, which was free at the point of entry, dropped off very quickly to 70 to 80,000 the day after, which was very worrying. I was shaking my boots a little bit. But then the numbers stayed sticky. They stayed about 60-70k through the rest of the weekend, and that was a very good sign. Q to launch weekend, where you need to pay $40 or I forget the pricing for the deluxe and the standard, but you need to pay a price of entry to get in. At that point, you were looking at 88,000 players on opening, and that stayed relatively sticky all evening, at least here in the UK. So my gut impression from that is, okay, that's promising. You had a lot of the concurrent players who were sticky last weekend. They actually came over to this weekend. Now, we have to be brutally honest with what Sony was expecting from Bungie, and maybe they've had conversations internally to set expectations, but just for comparison, Destiny on Steam would have launched to about 300,000 concurrents, the big launches, maybe 250, 300,000. You're talking maybe 1 million total players in total. Destiny expansion launches back in the Destiny 1 days used to crash PlayStation Network. That's how big it was. So, but the Steam concurrence on Destiny of about 250 to 300,000 for an expansion launch, that's been true up until about Final Shape. It's fallen off since, but that was true up until about 2024. So I don't think there's any argument that an opening of 88,000 for Marathon is probably a bit below what Bungie and Sony would have liked. However, we are in a niche genre. Extraction shooters aren't the most accessible genre. However, that being said, I mean, look at our creators. So Bungie would Sony rather would rightfully be able to point to that and say, look, if our creators can do it, why can't we? So that's just some expectation setting. The game has a promising start, there's no doubt. But compared to Destiny, we're looking a little bit lower. So going from that then, you might be thinking, oh well, the game's cooked, right? 88,000, players are going to trail off over time. You may be looking at 30, 40,000. The game probably had a development budget of about 200 to 250 million. because it's been, not because it's an expensive game as such, but because they tossed around for about 5 or 6 years trying to figure out what Marathon was. There was a lot of developer expenses paid during that time. So the core product you're looking at was probably developed in about 2 to 3 years, but they've spent a lot longer than that just trying to figure out what it was going to be. So that's the sort of thing, the development budget, how expensive Bungie is to run, and they are expensive to run, coupled with what I would call a soft to promising launch for Marathon. That has me a little worried, not so much from a perspective of, oh, you know, there won't be many people playing the game. There's plenty of people playing the game. We need the finances to work out for Sony and Bungie to support this thing. So you might be listening to me thinking like, oh, he's a doomer, this doesn't sound good. I'm going to counter that with, let's look at a game like Rainbow Six Siege. That launched in 2016 or 17, maybe a bit earlier, on Steam to about, I think it was like 17,000 concurrents. Similar on console. It had a soft launch. Similar with games like Warframe. There's these games that come out and they're very soft launches, and if you were to extrapolate from that, you'd think the game's cooked. But through very positive word of mouth, and because the games get good, consistent developer support over a number of years. I mean, Rainbow Six Siege, look, I don't know if I have the numbers to hand here. Let's see. Yeah, I don't, but oh, I do. So that had a all-time peak of 200,000, coming from a starting peak when it launched of about, I don't know, 17,000, 18,000. So that shows you where developer support and a good word of mouth can get you. And this is where I want to pivot back to Marathon. So given these numbers I've described, one number I didn't mention was the frankly incredible user reviews for this game on PlayStation and particularly on Steam. The game hit 91% positive reviews on Steam last night. It's down to about 87% now. That is bonkers. For a multiplayer live service game, that's really, really impressive. And if you look at the sentiment on the Marathon subreddit, there's this sense, and it's intangible, but I just want to, if I might try to summarize it, it's this sense of a really tight, good community that's willing to help each other, that's willing to advocate for the game. So I think you have all the ingredients here, certainly, coupled with the fact that, or I shouldn't say the fact that, coupled with the impression, at least us Marathon diehards have, that the game is quite fun. Like, I play the game and I think, how is this game not more popular? It's so fun, and I don't think I'm gaslighting myself. But you have all the ingredients here of Rainbow Six Siege, which is positive word of mouth, good reviews. Hopefully, the third ingredient is good developer support, and I think we're guaranteed that about 6 months to a year, because Bungie and Sony will want to see how this goes. But you have the ingredients here for a Rainbow Six Siege style slow growth. And so the two scenarios I want to present you with are these. Marathon has two paths it can go down. One is the Destiny style path, which is you have 88,000 players on launch for Marathon. For Destiny at least, that launch peak is never hit again, maybe until the next expansion. So for that would be a nightmare scenario for Marathon. I think if Marathon peaks at 88,000 and trails off and trails off and trails off, and say we're looking this time next year at concurrence of about 30,000 and it hasn't really come back to those launch highs, at that point you can probably, there's no need to worry about the game being shut down. But if you're expecting huge developer support, huge new raids, huge new maps, lots of new runner shells and weapons, you can probably put those dreams to bed. It'll maybe get token support, enough to make a bit of money. But that's the sort of support you're looking at. The good scenario is, the Rainbow Six Siege scenario, that the game comes out, we have all the ingredients, hopefully good developer support, very good word of mouth, because those reviews are honestly astonishing, and just, you know, generally a sticky player base. If word of mouth can get out there and you see 88,000 this weekend, and maybe when the raid comes out it peaks up over 1,000, and maybe when word of mouth gets out about the raid suddenly those average concurrents just, they remain very sticky, or they start slowly tricking upwards. At that point you can say, alright, okay, this might be good. Like, there might be something here for Bungie to continue investing in. And that's the other thing. So I've been a Destiny player for 10 years. From my analysis, I think the only way they turn around that game in terms of player count, and it is in the bin in terms of player count, I'm really sad to say, is a Destiny 3. That requires massive upfront investment that Sony might not be willing to make. But if Bungie can pitch Sony on the idea that, look, okay, Marathon didn't start as strong as Destiny, however, we have good word of mouth, players are ticking up, we have maybe 15% more concurrence in 2027 than we did in 2026. That's an argument for Sony to go, okay, we'll give you more money. Sure, we might not have as big of a bang of a return of investment as we might have on a Destiny 3, but the upfront investment is lower. So that's all to say, there is a positive scenario here, and if we can keep those concurrents sticky, if word of mouth continues to be positive, if Bungie please doesn't, they have to not step on a landmine or a PR disaster. You have all these scenarios in Destiny where they I don't know, they just do something silly with the microtransactions, or they try to be stingy with what content they give you or things like that. They need to avoid PR landmines. Just stay away from that. If Bungie can build some good PR, if Marathon can come out looking like the underdog that's slowly building concurrence, there's a good future here, okay? So, and it falls down to us as players. You don't, I mean, it's Bungie's job to advocate for the game, but if you have friends who might be interested in the game, definitely say to them, say, look, I'm having fun with this game, do you want to try it? You know, it's that sort of word of mouth that's going to take this game from being on a tightrope financially to, oh, this is good. Because Marathon, Bungie has a very fast burn rate, which is to say they burn a lot of cash, and Microsoft said so when they tried to acquire them back in 2021. And I'm sure Sony knows that too. Well, they have to know it because they spent $4 billion on them. But Marathon, as compared to Destiny, is a much cheaper game to provide content for. You don't need cutscenes and missions and choreographed motion capture and tons of new guns per season and new PvE and PvP activities. Like, Marathon is very tightly scoped, so there's room for maneuver here. So just to summarize all of what I've said is, we have two scenarios. One is if the game starts trickling off and say the raid underwhelms, you're looking at very token support from Bungie. Enjoy the game for what it is, but it won't change substantially. But if we have a Rainbow Six Siege style turnaround, which I definitely think is possible looking at the numbers, the game could really deliver, both in terms of content and for Bungie. So yeah, that's it. Look, I just wanted to drop in. I just wanted to give a very real look at the numbers. I don't mean to doom, or I don't mean to put the blinders on and be hopelessly optimistic. I just wanted to give you my hopefully informed take of where the game can go from here. But look, enjoy launch weekend. Oh, it's so fun, and I cannot wait for that raid. I believe Outpost is dropping today, and then the Marathon ship raid will drop in about 2 weeks. That raid race is going to go crazy. So look, thanks for being along for the journey. Wherever this train leads, at least we did it together. So thanks, guys, and if you could do me a favor, hit like and subscribe and all that stuff. We're slowly trying to grow the channel, so it'd be really good to build like a good core Marathon community here. But thanks very much, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye bye.